A simple woman, kicked out of first class. They had no idea. Her billionaire husband owned the airline. Imagine walking into a room where everyone expects you to look a certain way, act a certain way, or simply belong. Now imagine being told, despite all evidence proving otherwise, that you don't fit in. That's exactly what happened to Olivia Bennet one quiet morning at Denver International Airport. Dressed in a simple sweatshirt and sweatpants, she stepped onto a first-class cabin, ready for her flight to Boston. But instead of the comfort and respect that comes with purchasing a premium ticket, she faced something far more unsettling: judgment, humiliation, and ultimately, forced removal from the very seat she had paid for. What the crew didn't know was that this unassuming woman wasn't just any traveler. She was married to Alexander Bennett, the billionaire tech innovator who now owned the entire airline, and their actions would set off a chain reaction that no one saw coming. The story begins on an ordinary day, bathed in the soft glow of the morning sun, streaming through the airport windows. Olivia moved through the bustling terminal with quiet confidence, her blonde hair tucked under a black cap. Dressed in clothes that spoke of practicality rather than luxury, she carried herself like anyone else there, a regular person catching a flight. But inside her backpack lay a boarding pass confirming her place in first class. For Olivia, flying commercial wasn't about necessity. It was about staying grounded, connected to the real world in ways wealth often insulates people from. Her decision to dress comfortably seemed harmless enough, but little did she know how much it would matter later. At the coffee shop, she exchanged pleasantries with the barista, fishing out cash instead of flashing the platinum card hidden in her phone case. It was a small gesture, yet symbolic of who Olivia was, a woman who valued authenticity over appearances. As boarding began for Flight 782 to Boston, Olivia joined the priority line, presenting her digital boarding pass without hesitation. The gate agent scanned it, smiled briefly, and let her proceed. Everything seemed normal until Olivia entered the gleaming first-class cabin, where luxury oozed from every detail: wide leather seats, polished wood accents, an attentive staff serving pre-departure champagne. This was supposed to be the start of a relaxing journey. But within moments, things took a turn. Diane Phillips, one of the flight attendants, greeted Olivia with a practiced smile that faltered slightly as she took in the casual attire. "First class is to your left," Diane said, her tone laced with doubt, even though Olivia already knew exactly where she was going. The subtle scrutiny began then, growing heavier with each passing second. It wasn't long before Richard, another crew member, approached Olivia, asking to see her boarding pass again. His skeptical gaze lingered longer than necessary, glancing between her phone screen and her sweatpants. A whispering consultation followed between him and Diane, both stealing curious looks in Olivia's direction. Across the aisle, a businessman in an expensive suit pretended not to notice, though his attention was palpable. Then came Caroline, the lead flight attendant, whose calm but cool demeanor masked the brewing tension. "There seems to be some confusion with your boarding pass," she said, eyeing Olivia's casual outfit. The implication was clear. "You don't look like you belong here." What unfolded next became a public spectacle. A humiliating exchange played out in front of other passengers. Despite showing her boarding pass multiple times, Olivia was asked for ID, a request never made of anyone else in the cabin. When she questioned why, pointing out the lack of a dress code, the crew doubled down, insisting she either verify her identity or move to economy class. The injustice burned deep, but Olivia refused to escalate further, knowing it would only delay the flight for everyone. With quiet dignity, she gathered her belongings and allowed herself to be escorted to economy. Aware that the eyes of fellow travelers were watching, some sympathetic, others indifferent. As she settled into her new seat, she locked eyes with Diane and said softly, "No, you don't apologize, but you might soon." Fast forward to the next morning, and the scene shifts to Summit Airlines corporate headquarters. In a sleek conference room filled with executives and board members, Chief Customer Officer Patricia Winters prepared for the quarterly review meeting. Passenger complaints had risen sharply over the past quarter, particularly concerning staff attitude. Little did anyone know, Alexander Bennett, the man behind the company's recent acquisition, was about to make an appearance, something he rarely did for such meetings. Meanwhile, across town, Alexander adjusted his tie in front of the mirror, listening intently as Olivia shared her thoughts about the incident. He wanted justice, but Olivia insisted this wasn't about revenge. It was about changing a culture that judged people based on appearances rather than character. "This is bigger than me or those 3 crew members," she told him firmly. Alexander nodded, agreeing to handle things her way, for now. Back at headquarters, Carolyn, Richard, and Diane sat together near the back of the room, surprised, but pleased by their invitation to the high-level meeting. They assumed it was recognition for their consistently high performance metrics. Perhaps they'd even be chosen to lead a new elite service team. But as Patricia began her presentation, highlighting the importance of customer experience, the atmosphere shifted unexpectedly. The door opened quietly, drawing everyone's attention. Standing there was the same woman they'd humiliated the day before, in the exact same sweatshirt and sweatpants. For a moment, confusion reigned, then recognition dawned, followed swiftly by dread. Alexander stood up, his towering presence commanding the room. "I believe some of you have already met my wife, Olivia Bennett," he announced, his voice steady, but carrying an unmistakable weight. The room froze, shock rippling through the audience. Caroline, Richard, and Diane looked like deer caught in headlights, their earlier confidence crumbling under the weight of realization. Patricia stammered, trying to regain control of the situation. But Alexander wasn't finished. "Olivia flew from Denver to Boston yesterday, in first class," he continued, each word landing like a hammer blow. Olivia stepped forward, still dressed in the outfit that had sparked the controversy, radiating calm purpose. "What happened yesterday wasn't a misunderstanding," she said, addressing the room directly. "It was bias in action." She recounted the events of the previous day, exposing not just her own treatment, but a pattern of similar incidents involving other passengers. 27 documented cases in just 3 months painted a damning picture of systemic discrimination, and yet the story doesn't end there. Instead of immediate firings or harsh punishments, Alexander proposed something different, something transformative. He announced a comprehensive anti-bias training program for all staff, along with reassignments for Caroline, Richard, and Diane to roles that would give them first-hand experience of the impact their biases had on others. "This isn't about punishment," he emphasized. "It's about understanding." As the meeting drew to a close, the tension in the room was electric. Would these measures work? Could true change come from accountability rather than vengeance? Just as the narrative reaches its pivotal moment, we leave you hanging. What happens next will redefine not just these individuals, but the entire culture of Summit Airlines. Stay tuned for the next chapter of this powerful story. As the meeting continued, the air in the conference room grew heavier with every passing second. Patricia Winters, once confident in her position as Chief Customer Officer, now looked like a woman standing on shaky ground. Her carefully prepared slides about customer satisfaction and premium service felt hollow against the raw truth Olivia had laid bare. The folder containing 27 documented incidents sat open on the table, its contents damning evidence of a culture that had festered unnoticed, or worse, ignored, for far too long. Board members exchanged uneasy glances, some scribbling notes furiously, while others leaned back in their chairs, visibly uncomfortable. For Alexander, this wasn't just about his wife's experience. It was about accountability at every level of the organization he now owned. He scanned the room, his piercing gaze landing briefly on each executive before returning to the 3 flight attendants who had started it all. Carolyn, Richard, and Diane sat frozen, their earlier confidence shattered. They were no longer the picture-perfect representatives of Summit Airlines' elite service. They were symbols of something deeper, uglier. Caroline's hands trembled slightly as she clutched her notepad, trying to maintain some semblance of professionalism. Richard stared straight ahead, avoiding eye contact with anyone, while Diane kept her focus fixed on the polished surface of the conference table, as if hoping it might swallow her whole. None of them had imagined their actions would escalate to this moment, but there they were, caught in a web of bias and judgment that went far beyond one incident. The realization hit hard. This wasn't just about Olivia Bennett. It was about everyone who had ever been made to feel small because they didn't fit someone else's idea of what belonging looked like. Alexander stood up, his presence commanding yet measured. "Let me be clear," he began, his voice cutting through the tension like a knife. "This isn't about firing people or punishing mistakes. It's about changing a mindset, a culture that allows these kinds of incidents to happen in the first place." His words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. He turned to face the 3 flight attendants directly. "You judged my wife based on how she dressed, not the ticket she purchased. You questioned her identity when you wouldn't have done the same for someone else. That's bias, plain and simple. And bias doesn't belong in an airline or any company I run." The weight of his statement settled over the room, leaving no room for misinterpretation. Olivia stepped forward then, her calm demeanor masking the storm of emotions brewing inside her. She addressed the room, not as a victim seeking revenge, but as someone determined to spark meaningful change. "I could have walked away from this quietly," she said, her voice steady but filled with conviction. "But doing that wouldn't fix anything. This isn't just about me. It's about the teenage boy in a hoodie who was treated like an imposter because he didn't look business class. It's about the elderly woman redirected from the lounge because her clothes didn't scream wealth. It's about every passenger who has ever been judged unfairly." Her words struck a chord, resonating with those in the room who had witnessed similar incidents but never spoken up. Patricia Winters finally found her voice, though it wavered under the pressure. "Mr. and Mrs. Bennett, I assure you will take immediate action to address these issues. Every employee will undergo mandatory training and will implement stricter protocols to prevent such biases moving forward." But Olivia interrupted gently, shaking her head. "Protocols aren't enough," she said. "You can write rules until your fingers bleed, but if people don't understand why those rules matter, nothing changes. This is about empathy, about seeing passengers as human beings, not stereotypes." The tension reached its peak when Alexander announced the next steps. Starting tomorrow, Caroline, Richard, and Diane will be reassigned to roles where they'll gain first-hand experience of the impact their actions have on others. 1 month working in our customer advocacy team, handling complaints directly, Another month serving in economy class, assisting passengers whose needs are often overlooked. After that, if their supervisors believe they've truly grasped the lessons here, they can reapply for first-class positions. The ripple effect of his decision spread across the room. Some executives nodded approvingly, recognizing the wisdom in giving these individuals a chance to grow, rather than simply discarding them. Others shifted uncomfortably, unsure whether this approach would work, or if it was too lenient given the gravity of the situation. For Caroline, Richard, and Diane, the announcement felt like both a reprieve and a sentence. They knew their careers and reputations were on the line. As the meeting adjourned, they lingered behind, watching as board members and executives filed out of the room. None of them spoke, each lost in their own thoughts. Caroline finally broke the silence. "What do we do now?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Richard shook his head, still processing everything. "We do what they tell us," he muttered, "and hope we don't screw it up again." Diane remained quiet, tears welling up in her eyes as she realized the depth of her mistake, not just professionally, but personally. Meanwhile, Olivia and Alexander left the building together, stepping into the crisp Denver morning. Despite the progress made, Olivia couldn't shake the nagging feeling that real change wouldn't come easily. "Do you think they'll learn?" she asked him as they walked toward their car. Alexander sighed, his expression thoughtful. "Some will, others might not. But the important thing is that we've planted the seed. Now it's up to them, and us, to nurture it." Olivia nodded, knowing full well that transformation rarely happened overnight. Still, she allowed herself a small smile. For the first time since boarding Flight 782, she felt a glimmer of hope, not just for herself, but for everyone who had ever been judged unfairly. Back at Summit Airlines headquarters, Patricia Winters gathered her team to begin implementing the new initiatives. The task ahead was daunting, but she understood the stakes. This wasn't just about improving customer satisfaction scores. It was about restoring trust, rebuilding relationships, and proving that Summit Airlines could lead by example. As Shia reviewed the list of employees scheduled for anti-bias training, she couldn't help but wonder how many lives this decision would touch. Would it be enough to turn things around, or was the damage already too deep? The days that followed brought whispers throughout the airline. Passengers noticed subtle changes. Flight attendants seemed more attentive, less quick to judge. Employees talked among themselves about the stories shared during training sessions, recounting moments when they'd unconsciously let biases guide their actions. Slowly but surely, the tide began to shift. Yet, beneath the surface, questions lingered. Had the company truly changed? Or was this just a temporary fix? And what awaited Carolyn, Richard, and Diane when they returned to their roles? If they returned at all, the answers lay somewhere in the future, waiting to unfold as the flight attendants continued their service. Something remarkable happened. A young woman in ripped jeans and a vintage band t-shirt settled into her first-class seat, 2 rows ahead of Olivia. She laughed with her companion, clearly excited about the journey ahead. No one questioned her presence or gave her a second glance. No subtle stares, no whispered comments. It was as if she belonged there, because she did. For Olivia, this small moment carried immense weight. The changes at Summit Airlines weren't just policies on paper. They were becoming part of the airline's DNA. This was the victory. Not that Olivia herself could now fly without judgment, but that others like her wouldn't face the same bias. Back in the galley, Caroline paused for a moment, watching Diane assist an elderly passenger dressed in casual clothes. The man smiled warmly, as Diane helped him adjust his seatbelt and handed him a blanket. There was no trace of condescension in her actions, only genuine care. Caroline felt a pang of pride, mixed with humility. Over the past 3 months, working alongside customers who had been wronged by staff assumptions taught her more than any training program ever could. Every complaint, every frustrated voice, every tearful account forced her to confront how deeply biases ran, not just within herself, but across the industry. Now, serving passengers with empathy felt less like a chore and more like a calling. When the plane landed in San Francisco, Olivia stayed seated for a few moments longer, letting the hum of the engines fade before gathering her things. As she stepped off the aircraft, Richard approached her once again. "Safe travels, Mrs. Bennet," he said sincerely. "Thank you for everything." His words lingered in the air, heavy with gratitude. Olivia nodded, offering him a small smile. "Thank you, Richard, for learning." It wasn't just lip service. It was acknowledgement of growth, of change earned through effort and reflection. Meanwhile, back at Summit Airlines headquarters, Patricia Winters stood before the boardroom table, presenting updated metrics. Customer satisfaction scores had surged, particularly among economy class passengers. Complaints related to discriminatory behavior had plummeted, replaced instead by glowing feedback about attentive service, regardless of appearance or status. "We've set a new standard," Patricia announced, her voice steady with pride. "Other airlines are already reaching out, asking how we did it. They're watching us. And so far, we're leading by example." Alexander sat quietly at the end of the table, listening intently. When Patricia finished, he leaned forward slightly. "This isn't the end," he reminded everyone. "It's a beginning. What we've achieved here is proof that meaningful change is possible when we address root causes instead of symptoms. But staying ahead means staying vigilant. We can't afford to slip back into old habits." His words resonated deeply, not just with the executives present, but with everyone involved in the transformation. For Olivia, the real test came weeks later when she boarded another flight. Not first class this time, but economy. She chose a middle seat near the back, blending seamlessly into the crowd. If anyone recognized her, they didn't say anything. Throughout the flight, the crew treated every passenger with the same level of respect, from business travelers in suits to families juggling carry-ons. When the captain welcomed them aboard, he added a personal note. "At Summit Airlines, we believe every traveler deserves dignity, no matter where they sit." Those words echoed in Olivia's mind long after the wheels touched down. Months turned into a year, and Summit Airlines became synonymous with inclusivity in premium travel. Other carriers began adopting similar anti-bias programs, inspired by what Alexander and Olivia had started. News outlets covered the story extensively, praising the Bennets not for wielding power recklessly, but for using it wisely. Employees like Caroline, Richard, and Diane emerged as ambassadors for change, sharing their experiences at conferences and workshops. Their stories served as reminders that accountability doesn't have to mean punishment. It can mean growth. In the end, the ripple effects reached far beyond the airline itself. Passengers who once hesitated to book flights due to past humiliations returned, finding comfort in the knowledge that they'd be treated fairly. Families traveling together felt less self-conscious about noisy toddlers or mismatched outfits. Business people realized they could dress comfortably without fear of being judged. Even celebrities flying incognito appreciated the lack of fuss over their identities. Respect, it seemed, transcended appearances. As Olivia packed for yet another trip, this time to speak at a climate research conference in Europe, She reflected on everything that had transpired. Her decision to dress casually that fateful morning hadn't been about making a statement. It was simply about being herself. Yet, it sparked a movement that reshaped an entire industry. Alexander walked into the room, tying his tie as usual. "Ready?" he asked, glancing at her sweatshirt-clad figure. Olivia grinned, grabbing her backpack. Always, the couple headed to the airport together, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. For them, the journey wasn't just about running an airline or building a legacy. It was about proving that humanity thrives when dignity is non-negotiable. And as their plane ascended into the sky, carrying people from all walks of life toward destinations unknown, Olivia knew one thing for certain: true luxury wasn't found in leather seats or champagne glasses. It was found in treating everyone equally, with kindness and respect.